Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PCOS Newsletter and Podcast. Today, I've got Georgia with me. Hi, Georgia. Nice to see you. So, Georgia is a registered nutritionist and a counselor in training, specializing in PCOS. And she has recently co-authored a very exciting research that I can't wait to get into in whether women have a lower resting energy expenditure. In more lame terms, do we, women with PCOS, have a slower metabolism? And that's obviously a question on a lot of people's, mind, including myself. It has been for a long time. So I'm super excited to get into the findings. But over to Georgia.
Oh, thank you so much. That was such a lovely introduction, and I'm very excited to be here. So thank you so much for allowing me to come and have this conversation with you today. So yes, I don't know where to kind of start with introducing myself. I have PCOS myself. I didn't get a diagnosis for quite a long time, and it's one of those things that, with hindsight, looking right back into teenage years, it's obvious now to me. But I know the struggles of getting a diagnosis, figuring out what to do, how to manage it for yourself, and we were talking about social media and some of the disempowering messages that are out there. So it's very exciting for me to be able to use my master's in nutrition to actually positively impact women's health, but specifically the world of PCOS as well.
I think it's so rare to see this combination of nutrition plus psychotherapist, right? And the fact that you're training to be a counselor and psychotherapist, I think these two worlds really have to combine. And I think a multidisciplinary approach to PCOS, weight loss, and any kind of chronic care management is so important. So I'm so excited to see these two people in one, two people in one, but two professions in one person.
All my personalities will come out. Yeah,
exactly. And so let's dive into kind of the research. What's the hypothesis, and why did you and the other authors kind of set up to start looking into this?
Yeah, so it actually started a couple of years ago. There was in the fitness industry a group of guys that are really into science, and they're not actually researchers, but they love to research and kind of just talk about what's actually going on. And they released a paper around PCOS and metabolism, and my partner and I actually can kind of see his little setup behind me there. He's a professor at the University of John Moores in Liverpool. And so, the two of us are science geeks, unfortunately, in nutrition. And we both picked up that paper and we were talking about it together, like, oh my God, this is so exciting. And I was like, it's a shame this is never going to be, released as actual research because they're not associated with universities. At which point he was like, well, we can change that. So that's how we kind of picked up that connection. He's friends with these people, Greg Knuckles over in America, and has a great connection with them. So that's kind of how that came about initially, of let's make this a real thing. Let's actually get this done properly. And that was very, very exciting. I was like wiggling on my seat, like, yes. And the reason we wanted to get into this, and me personally, is there is an assumption that women with PCOS have a slower metabolism, and that's why weight loss can be a struggle. And as a result of that assumption, a lot of the time the advice is you need to cut calories, you need to cut out, foods that you enjoy. So usually the higher calorie foods, and that you're going to have quite a restrictive diet forever. And if you don't go extreme, you're going to struggle. And that's, really disempowering information. But it's based on research that is outdated, and also based on research that is very poor quality. You might be shocked to hear that women's health is not great quality research.
We know.
Yeah. So the underlying question really was, is PCOS actually causing a metabolic disadvantage for women, or is something else going on?
Oh, I love that. Also, I just I love the story, because I think as asked like nutritionists and also, PTs and all of the people that work with women, like would love to put some of the things that they see in practice, like anecdotally, into a research kind of setting and see, does that kind of hold true? Like I would love to do that, but like the gap between these people and research, like as in like university, I feel like it's so hard and so I love that your partner was like, yeah, no, I can figure this one out and get excited about it. So kudos to you. I think it's very brilliant. And yes, I think women with PCOS like who have tried to lose weight in the past, they have felt, including myself, that is much harder. And I think the reason for it is because you see other people, that might not have PCOS, that doing some of the things out there, they just kind of see the weight drop compared to yourself, which you might be like, oh, actually, no. And this is true for me. Like, I, even through all the strength training and everything else, I do not lose like this, like it's just, so I think it's normal to kind of make the jump from that to be like, oh, is it because I have a slower metabolism? And as a result, I should eat all of the spicy food, right? That was like one of the things that people used to do for metabolism, and the apple cider vinegar and all that. So I can see how it's becoming a tale, within this space. So what was the outcome of the research, and how was the research, and is it true? Do we have slower metabolisms?
Yeah, sorry, that's it. End of chat. No, the difference was really insignificant. So I guess to be as specific as possible, the mean difference was 30 calories a day between women with PCOS and without PCOS. So we're talking a third of a banana, like a couple of bites of fruit is the difference, which is not meaningful when it comes to weight loss, or, body composition, specifically sort of fat loss.
Is that, sorry, just to go
Yeah,
into
go ahead.
more understanding that, is that essentially your metabolic rate at rest? So if you were to do nothing for the whole day, right?
Mhm.
And your base kind of energy that your body would use just to breathe and live, compared to women with you took women with PCOS and women without PCOS and see if there's a difference across the board, because if there were, that should be lower. Is that, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So when we're talking about metabolism, like resting energy expenditure, it's how much your body needs in terms of energy, so calories at absolute rest. So if you were lying on the sofa, how much energy does your body need to keep you breathing, pumping your blood, blinking, thinking, growing your hair, growing your nails, very basic. So it's about 60 to 70% of our daily energy needs before anything else. So before we've chewed, before we've got up and walked to the toilet, answered the phone, any of that. So it's your absolute minimum that you need. And so, yeah, the difference between a woman with PCOS lying on the sofa and doing nothing and a woman without PCOS lying down doing nothing, a woman with PCOS just expended 30 calories less to keep herself going. And when you think of it like that, it's so insignificant. It doesn't make a difference at all.
Yeah.
And that's just the average. But, that means there are some who expended more and some who expended less. But that's our kind of average difference.
Yeah. I think that's so, for me, is obviously both, it's empowering to a certain degree, because it tells me there's nothing fundamentally wrong with you when it comes to how your body burns energy. And I do think there's other challenges around it, which obviously we'll come to it in a second. But I think it's good for women with PCOS to know that there's nothing wrong at that level, right? And they can approach, weight loss, but also lifestyle changes with kind of this baseline of inherently there's nothing wrong with how your body is processing energy, right? Would you say that that's correct?
There's nothing broken. And I think that's really important, because we can feel like somehow our bodies are letting us down, or we're letting our bodies down, and there's some kind of broken relationship with our body, and that can have all kinds of implications. So I think actually just knowing that your body is working the way that it should and nothing is broken is quite relieving in a way. For me, definitely, it's like, okay, I can get that sigh of relief there.
Yeah, of course, yeah. How what was the methodology? So how were these kind of things measured, or women with PCOS and without PCOS?
So the research that we did was a systematic review and meta-analysis, which basically just means that we searched through a back catalogue of all the research that's ever been done on PCOS, put it all together, so all the studies, and then looked at it as a whole. So our research was basically researching the research and kind of putting it together and going, okay, if we put this puzzle together, what are we actually seeing here? What is the picture that we get? And for people that love the research, we use things like PubMed, Medline, Web of Science, and we were looking very specifically from kind of 1990 to January 2025. That was the time period that we were kind of looking through. And you would be surprised at the state of some of the research. It was so poor. When we're talking about like our inclusion criteria, we were looking at studies that directly measured resting energy expenditure in PCOS.
Mm-hmm.
There was lots of indirect measurement, which was very, very variable, and it just meant that the information we could take from that wasn't very helpful. It was very poor quality.
Yeah,
it was like trying to catch air and measure it, and then everyone compare what they'd done. It was very different.
which is quite shocking and true for a lot of things out there. Like when you start really looking into, and I think it depends on the funding and who did it, and like there's just so many kind of. And I don't want to diss in any way the research community, because I think they have a hard, like actually, like from financially specifically, right? Like to actually make this research work. Like I'm surprised it still happens, right? To be honest. But it is quite shocking to see how many poor quality studies there are out there. But overall, from my knowledge, meta-analysis and systemic reviews are kind of a gold standard of, knowing the truth about a subject, because it does look not just one study, it looks at multiple things and can compare, which means that the actual subject number is probably much higher. Do you know what was the subject number for this in terms of when you colluded all of the studies? Was it hundreds or?
No, that's a good question. I actually don't have that to hand. I'm sure I can find it for you.
Yeah, we'll figure out once the research is fully published. But I think that's the power of it, because usually RCTs are done, like randomized controlled trials are done on like 60 people or 100 people or like 120. But when you collide them together into meta-analysis, it can become thousands, right? So then the power of the truth, and what it is so much bigger. Cool. That's amazing. So obviously, so metabolism is not the problem, but we can't deny that people and women with PCOS and people with PCOS, to be inclusive, still feel like losing weight is a huge, huge struggle. And what else do you think contributes to that? And if it's not metabolism?
Yeah, it's a good question, because the reality is still there that weight loss is harder. Well, fat loss can be harder. And I'm just distinguishing between the two because, some of the clients that I work with, they might lose inches from their waist, from their hips. They might lose dress sizes, but they may see that their overall weight changes in just a couple of kilograms. So I just want to kind of specify, because sometimes we can get very focused on the scale, but we can see huge differences in composition. But I think one of the main drivers is insulin resistance. Because it does alter the way that the body stores energy, and if we're not helping to manage that, supporting insulin sensitivity in some way, then that's going to make things feel really, really tough. And then beyond that, or even in combination, if we think of it again as that puzzle piece of all the little pieces fitting together, we do see appetite dysregulation as well. So I think one of the most difficult things for women with PCOS is when they get sick of dieting and tracking and going, okay, I'm going to do intuitive eating. I am done with this, because, tracking is very restrictive, but intuitive eating can be really tough if you have disrupted appetite signals. So we genuinely, because of insulin resistance as well, feel much hungrier, a lot less satisfied from the same meal that somebody without PCOS would feel, a lot snackier. We get a lot more cravings. And so if you are trying to then eat intuitively, you want to go and eat, right? Because you're hungry.
Yeah.
So it's really unhelpful at first. We kind of have to learn to manage those cravings and work with your body. So then intuitive eating is more helpful. Then we have, low mood. Women with PCOS more predisposed to anxiety, depression, and that can mean that we might lean on food for comfort a little bit more. Also, fatigue is a symptom many women with PCOS have. And if you're tired, if I've had a bad night's sleep, I don't wake up thinking I'm going to eat lettuce and I'm going to run to the gym. It's like, I'm going to move a lot less today and I'm probably going to eat
More.
higher carbohydrate foods, which again is going to impact insulin resistance. So we have a lot of physical and psychological things that are kind of in our little soup that do make weight loss harder. And that's before we think about things like body image that comes up, whether that's body image because we feel a particular way about our size or our body fat, or for me, I'm going to say it's the facial hair really impacts how I feel about myself. And there are lots of other physical, visible and invisible symptoms that women might be battling with. And again, that has a big impact on how we think and feel about ourselves, our body, and how food comes into play. So sorry, that was quite a long answer, but it's to say
but I
that
think it is complex.
humans are complex, right? There's a lot going on beyond
Yeah.
calories in, calories out.
And I can actually add at least another 2 to 3 to that list, because
Yeah.
one is the fact that even if you manage to lose a bit of weight, your body will respond with an increased appetite. I think there was this research that was showing for every kilogram that you lose, your appetite goes up by 100 calories. So and this is regardless of whether you have PCOS or not. So now if you add it to the insulin resistance and all of the things that we discussed, it's incredible. Because from an evolutionary perspective, losing weight is not good. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Losing the energy storage that you have means that you might be at risk, if in case of famine, and we're still in a famine kind of feast gene kind of pool, it might mean that you will die, right? So that's another level of, thing that you have to add to it. In addition, you have, depending on your environment, depending on how busy you are, like, are you a mom of 3? Are you, battling with, something, maybe you're caring for an elderly, like there's just so many other environmental things that can make it so hard to be able to make the right choices. And then just to finish up on this topic, like adding on the confusion about nutrition, because obviously we're both nutritionists. So actually having a good composition of a breakfast, right, is confusing. Like, I don't know how the heck we confused nutrition so badly that we don't actually understand what to eat anymore, right? So people try all of these different diets and different breakfasts and different lunch, and they might not be nourishing their body enough to be able to feel satisfied. They probably eat less than they should be eating, and then that comes with a whole lot of you're eating a lot more later down the day or the line.
Okay.
So I think there's so much complexity around this topic. And I do think PCOS, if I were to conclude, makes it a bit harder to lose weight because of all of this other kind of bubbles. So I don't want people to use that as an excuse as such, right? Because at the end of the day, you got to handle these cards. We need to make the most out of the cards that we got in life. That's my kind of way of seeing life. But in the same time, it's good to understand all of these things so we can work with them, so we can put in place the right things to help us with the insulin resistance, with the composition of the food, with the mindset, with the low mood, with the fatigue. So we can actually create a plan that would really work for you. And this is why diets don't work, because they're a one size fits all, and then it just fails. Yeah. Sorry, I also went on a rant.
No, I loved your rant. And you're right. PCOS doesn't mean that it's doom and gloom. It just means we need to be mindful of considerations that perhaps those without PCOS don't need to particularly think about. But again, everyone is working with something different. Just because somebody doesn't have PCOS doesn't mean that they're not actually having to make different considerations. So I think it's, again, rather than fighting against our body, just understanding, okay, so this is what my body needs and what I feel good with. And so these are the choices that I make to support me.
Yeah. How do I work with what I've got given,
Yeah.
essentially? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
Perfect.
think in this modern age, there's just so much support out there that I think picking up on the right type of professionals and the type of friends, of partners, of support group is so important, because the people you surround yourself with will be able to work with you, not against you. Like work with what you've got and make it work, essentially. And in the, obviously we've kind of touched on, is it harder to lose weight? And in this research, obviously you had to read all of those studies that went into the meta-analysis. Was there anything that really surprised you in the work that you've done?
I think what surprised me in actually kind of comes along with one of the limitations of the research is that not every research group is using the same criteria to diagnose PCOS. So some people are using Rotterdam criteria, some people are using NIH. So even comparing PCOS woman to PCOS woman was actually potentially quite tough to do, because they were looking at different things. So that was quite interesting, because sometimes, we might read some research that's been published, or read up an article about some research and just think, oh, okay, that's what that is. But actually we may not be able to apply that to the population that we're thinking about. So that was interesting.
Yeah.
I think it was interesting that very little of the research really supported this big difference in metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
And yet that myth of, oh, you have a slow metabolism is so persistent. And I think that really stood out to me, because really nothing here is actually showing that this is the case.
Yeah.
And certainly not convincingly on a scale. And yet all I can hear in the background of my head is, social media saying like, oh, 800 calories, 1200 calories, cut out this, cut out that. And I think that really surprised me. You read through the research, right? Did anything surprise you?
I think yes, and to kind of touch on what you said, I think there's evolutionary reason of why that happens. And I don't want to go down a rabbit hole about information, but in order for us as species to communicate between big groups, we've had to synthesize information to myths. If I'm not mistaken, I think I read it in one of the AI books, because that was the only way the information could travel through multiple groups of people. And I think what's happening here is, I think what surprised me is, like, metabolism, maybe to us who are nutritionists and research, it means resting energy expenditure, right? But for someone that is not in the space, metabolism just means I can't lose weight. Like, I think the nuance there is very hard to grasp if you're not in the industry. And I think this is why, professionals like ourselves have and people on the internet should definitely be kept accountable to break these things down and explain to someone what does that actually mean. And that's why I'm so excited about this conversation, because I don't think that happens enough. So I think this is where it goes from, oh, I can't lose weight, to like, I have a slow metabolism, very quickly, because people don't understand all of the different things that we, like, even in our conversation now, we've probably listed 5 or 6 things that go into losing weight and metabolism as such, like insulin resistance, environment, all those things. So you really have to have this in-depth kind of conversations to be able to unpick, but that's not how social media works, and that's not how humans work, because of this evolutionary need to kind of pass down information. And every time that someone passes it down, it loses the depth, right? Because someone is trying, like, whatever you heard, you're like, oh, no, but you actually do. I'm sure that someone would listen to this and say, no, but you still have a slow metabolism because of the insulin resistance and all these things, right? Because it's too complex, essentially, to be able to be transferred across multiple people. But anyway, I'm not an evolutionarist or historian or anything like that, but like, I love that stuff because it's so interesting to see how people behave, and I'm sure from a psychotherapist perspective, you're also quite intrigued by that. I think what surprised me as well is that I think what I and actually even myself, like I didn't really think about metabolism being measured by resting expenditure. Like I think I didn't even make that kind of connection. That's why I was so excited to see it. Because I think that I wrote an article about this, like, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago. And I was really just comparing the ability to lose weight rather than looking into what contributes to losing weight, and resting energy expenditure being one. So I think it's exciting to see this type of measurement of metabolism coming out, essentially.
Yeah. No, I think, and again, like quite empowering to kind of discuss that as well. But even on just, sorry, my brain is going there already, but like when we're thinking about menopause, one of the things that gets also, I guess, washed all over Instagram is that if you're in menopause, it's tougher to lose weight, again, because your metabolism is slower. But actually, when we look at the research, between the ages of 20 and about 60, your metabolism pretty much stays the same. And we're talking about resting energy expenditure. You may move less, you may eat differently. That will impact, calories in and calories out. But it's only really when we're kind of getting over 60 that there becomes a slight decline. And a lot of that is age related. It's not menopause related.
It might also be muscle loss related, right? Because your muscles uses energy. So if you're losing muscles, you're probably losing the energy. Is that true? I don't know.
Yeah. And also because if you're losing muscle mass, you'll be losing bone mass as well. But also if you're losing muscle mass, we're losing one of our biggest kind of sponges that takes up glucose as well, which means that we're then more likely to be storing excess glucose as body fat rather than within our muscles. So there is a crossover with PCOS, which I get very excited if we start talking about PCOS in menopause. My head will explode. But I just think
let's do another one on that. Like we can do a whole on that, like
yes, well, I will be like falling over myself the whole time. But I just think that there is this crossover, and I think it's really empowering. Sometimes we initially think, oh, it's really disappointing to think that actually my metabolism is fine, but actually it's really empowering to be like, okay, great, so that's fine. Don't need to worry about my metabolism. I can just focus, set that aside, and I can focus on these big rocks that will make a difference for me. And I think that's exactly. Surprising and exciting.
Yeah. Now I have another thought, which is obviously like, even the level of muscles that you have, right, will directly impact your resting energy expenditure. And one of the biggest things that you can do for PCOS is actually strength training and making sure that you keep your muscle mass, because of this reason, but also because of the glucose storage, as you just explained, and so many others. So there's exactly like, if you start from a place of like, this is the cards I'm being dealt with, but I have all of these things to work with, and not from, this is horrible.
Yeah.
And one closing kind of thought. What's your message for women with PCOS with all of these things in mind? And what do you want them to know and remember from this conversation?
Wow. Okay, I'm going to link the two together off the back of what you just said, because again, my brain was like, yes, muscle mass is important, but as we typically in PCOS have a slightly higher androgen level, it does mean that we have a little bit of an advantage over women that don't have PCOS when it comes to building muscle mass, which is amazing. So this is actually in our favor. We get to build it a little bit more easily than other people. So that kind of links into, I suppose, my closing thought is that, your body isn't working against you. And I think having a compassionate understanding and a great relationship with your body, this is my counseling side coming out, is really important. And I think we get to challenge this assumption that there is something wrong with your body, that your metabolism is broken. And I think, the real work isn't about finding the perfect PCOS diet and the perfect lifestyle. It's about figuring out, okay, I haven't failed diets. Diets have actually failed me. What is it that works for me? What makes me feel great? I think this gives us a lot more hope than perhaps we've been led to believe initially. If you go and Google PCOS and diet, it's overwhelming and it's kind of scary. So I think, my closing thought is that actually it gets to be simpler and far more empowering than we initially think.
Thank you so much, Georgia. I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for having me.